Thank you so much for coming back. We're going to be learning binding off. Some people call it casting off, but it is finishing your knitting. So after we do this, if you wanted to go back to the description in the knitting tutorial, there should be a link for a scarf, and it's basically casting on, knitting every row, and then binding off. So here we go. We start binding off in knit by knitting 2 stitches. Then we go into the first stitch on the needle, we lift it off over the second stitch and drop it off. And we continue by doing the same thing. We knit 1 more stitch. Then we come back into that first stitch, bring it off over the second and drop it off the needle. We'll do some more here. Knit a stitch, bring it off, and then drop it off. Knit another stitch, and you could go in like I am, or you could go in from the reverse if it feels better. I'm just fine going in this way. Bring it through, dropping it off. Knitting another stitch, coming in, bringing it through, and dropping it off. I split the yarn there. So we're knitting another one, bringing it through, and dropping it off. So this is what binding off looks like if you bind off in the knit. Now if you're trying to bind off in purl or in pattern, you start, if you're binding off in purl, you do the purl stitch, but it's the same thing. It's bringing the yarn, that's the first stitch, off and over the second one. I'm hoping I could keep this in frame. This is more awkward in front of the camera, getting in the right position. So I'm going to knit 1 more stitch, purl 1 more stitch, and then let me drop that yarn so you can see better. But you're taking the back needle and bringing it off over the front needle again. And then we'll purl 1 more stitch. It's just weird getting into frame, especially with that string in the way. In person it's much easier, and it's appearing right here. So we purl again. And you're going into that stitch, bringing it off over the back. We'll purl 1 more. Drop this so you can see it, going into that back stitch, bringing it through and dropping it off. So that is binding off in purl. It gives you that bumpy ridge on one side and then the knit looking pretty braid on the opposite. I will put it in back again and show you the knitting 1 more time. Most of the time when I bind off, I'm binding off in knitting and not purl. But if you're binding off in pattern, which some patterns will call for, like knit 2, purl 2, you would want to be able to switch back and forth and do it. So we just go across and we just do 2 stitches at a time. Knit 1, going into the stitch, and dropping it off. So there we go. And to actually finish the product, I'm going to use my blade here. I am going to take the end of yarn and pull it through that very last loop. And there we go. That is our little swatch completed. So binding off in knit is that smooth. Binding off in purl creates the bumpy ridge. And it's good to know both. So there we are. Thank you for coming back again. If there's anything else that you would like to see, make sure to start asking me in the comment section. And, oh, that's just a little piece of the yarn that's sticking out all funny. Was bugging me through the camera, seeing that. Okay, so anyway, there we are. It's easy. This is the knit side. This is the purl side. And I'll be back shortly with some ribbing.